We raising a generation in power. We raising a generation in power. We raising a generation in power.
You're back. but okay. What I'm going to be talking about today is a bit hard to swallow, if one might say or one might add. It's a very, I would say it contradicts what many people say about the topic. And this is the last message I'll be giving on the greater topic of greatness, which has been basically the topic of my talks or sermons for the past few months. So this one's the last one. I don't know what's coming next. I wish I knew, but we'll find out next week Thursday. So today, to close it off, I want to talk about comfort. And that's why I was asking you actually if you are comfortable in your life, and because comfort is a very, very serious, or it has a very serious effect on our futures. I would like to draw your attention to, if you do this, but if you would read the book of Joshua, chapter 13, just the first verse. God comes to Joshua and he says that, Joshua, I know that you are old and that you are well advanced in age, but there is still more land to conquer. So, just to give you a little background story, Joshua was basically the leader of the Israelites after the death of Moses. So he was basically Moses' successor. So in the time of Joshua, the Israelites had conquered so much. The land that they had spread over nations. Basically, they owned a hell of a lot of the piece of land. I'd say, if I was to say, they owned almost 60% of the earth as it was. It was under their domain and it was under their rulership. So they were at a very successful point in their lives. I mean, imagine 60% of the world being yours. 60% of the world's wealth, land, materials, it was theirs to do anything that they so wanted to do. And even in a state where they had achieved so much, God still comes to Joshua in his old age. So, if you were to stop it there to think about it, Joshua was comfortable because of two things. Number one, he was old. When we get old, we tend to be comfortable because we're thinking that we should have achieved all that we should have achieved a long time ago. I mean, Joshua at this time was more than 80 years old. I am doubting that he could even carry a sword. So he had right in our eyes to be comfortable, because he had come to a point where he was old and he had already achieved what he should have achieved. And then, so that was the first point of his comfort. The second one was his success throughout the years. So already he had led the Israelites to own a big portion of the world, so you could say that he was successful. He had already attained greatness, but even in this point of greatness, God still comes to him and says, there is still more land to be conquered. So what does this mean? This means that even in very comfortable conditions and even very comfortable situations, God never wants us to be comfortable. This means that even in times or situations where we have achieved much, where we have achieved many of the dreams that we had set for ourselves, where we look back and we think that we have become great, even when we come to that point, God still says that if you're still alive, there's still something else you can achieve. So God, in essence, was saying to Joshua that even in your old age, even in the midst of your success, even in the surrounding of greatness, do not be comfortable. So it basically says that even in comfortable situations, we should never be comfortable. Even in situations where we achieve much, even in situations where we have done much, even in situations where we have accumulated wealth, there is no reason to stop. Why? The first reason why we should never be comfortable in life is because comfort decreases the incentive to grow. Whenever you're comfortable, you don't see a need to grow. Whenever you're comfortable, you're just saying, okay, I've done what I need to do, so why should I continue? So whenever you're comfortable, you see no reason to be the better you. to improve who you are, to improve your standard of living. Whenever you're comfortable, you see no reason in becoming the person that God has created you to be, because you think that what you've achieved so far is the ultimate, only to find out that what you've achieved so far is actually nothing. So being comfortable, even in comfortable situations, brings this idea that being comfortable is somewhat opposing the will of God. Because everything that has breath has purpose. And everything that has purpose has to grow. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing that has purpose that doesn't grow. So it says that we should never be comfortable. Never be comfortable with what you've achieved in life. Because as long as you're alive, there's still more to achieve. Never be comfortable mostly with yourself. Now, the idea of comfort, as it seems, may bring forth this idea of ungratefulness. That even when you are uncomfortable, I'm not saying be ungrateful. I'm saying be grateful to God for what you've achieved, but realize that what you've achieved is not the ultimate. Realize that what you have done now, even though you are very grateful for what you have now, it is not the ultimate. There is still more to achieve. So even in your gratefulness, don't be comfortable. That's just the gist of the story. I mean, if God could come to Joseph, who was more than 80 years old, and tell him that there's still wars and battles that he must fight, how much more for us who are, 18, 19, 20? How much more does God want us not to be comfortable? Because in our comfort, God loses control of our lives. Because you must understand that God controls a purpose-driven life. And a purpose-driven life realizes every day that there's opportunity. And a purpose-driven life realizes every day that there's opportunity to make a difference in the lives of other people. There's opportunity to increase wealth. There's opportunity to become a better person. So when you lose the incentive to take opportunities, when you lose the incentive to live a purpose-driven life, God can no longer work through you. So by being comfortable with who you are and being comfortable with what you've achieved, you are telling God that you're okay. You don't need Him to take you any further. You don't need the will that He has for your life to go any further. You get what I'm saying? Hello?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's the one thing. Okay, I want to be done in 5 minutes, so I'll rush. Because I've seen many of y'all are sick and you just like to finish later. So that's the one thing. I mean, it makes sense for you to not be comfortable in a comfortable position, because it's very comfortable. So for you not to be comfortable in a comfortable position basically says that move out of your pattern of thinking now and move into a place where you think like there is no box. Because being comfortable is a point of saying, of boxing yourself in, saying that I've achieved this much, this is the purpose that God has had for me, I'm done. But then when you move out of that, you begin to see that, as we said before, limitations, that the only limitation is yourself. So the only limitation facing you in that point is your comfort. And if you remove the element of comfort and you no longer be comfortable with yourself, which is very important, never to be comfortable with yourself. Because the moment you're comfortable with yourself, you never become a better person. The moment you're comfortable with who you are now, I'm not saying hate yourself. Please don't hate yourself. I'm just saying that realize that as you are now, there's room for growth. As you are now, and even in the future when you're 80 years old, 90 years old, there will always be room for growth. There will always be room for you to expand and to become a better person. So never be comfortable with yourself. Because being comfortable with yourself stops you from becoming a better person. So, stopping that one, never be comfortable in a comfortable situation. That was basically the first part. Never be comfortable in a comfortable situation. Number two, if you go to the book of Kings, I forgot what chapter specifically, but you are encountered with the story of 4 men with leprosy. Now, many of you might know the disease of leprosy. Basically, in the disease of leprosy, you basically witness your body get eaten away. You literally wake up tomorrow, you'd have no ear, or you'd have no nose, or one finger would be gone. And it was a very, very contagious disease. So people with leprosy usually lived outside the city. So if we were in a city, we'd have walls, very, very big walls around us. Then the people with leprosy would be sitting outside the city. live outside the city, outside the gates of the city, so that the disease doesn't spread. So if you read the book of Kings, you encounter the story of 4 men with leprosy. Now, these men were in a time where they knew that if they would go into the city, they would die, because the people in the city would kill them. And they knew that if they stayed where they were, they would die. And it was a time of war, so if they tried to escape the walls or to escape from the close vicinity of the city, the enemies would kill them. So either way, these guys were dead, basically speaking. In their minds, every situation and every decision that they would have taken led them to death. So you would see that these guys were in a very, very uncomfortable position, because they're at a point where you go this way, you die, you go that way, you die, you go this way, you die. So what's the point? But then they said something very profound to each other. I mean, if you're at a situation, I know myself that the old me, if I was in a situation where whatever decision I took, I would die, I would just stay where I was, because I was going to die anyway. If I go into the city, that's effort. I'd rather save my energy than go into the city and die. If I go there, I'm going to die anyway. So knowing me, I'll just stay in the same position, which is what I think most of us would do. We're thinking that if every avenue that we will take, every decision that we'll take, will lead us to making a loss, then we'll just stay where you are. Meaning that you stay the person that you are. Okay? So these guys were in a very, very uncomfortable position, and they said this thing to each other. They said, why sit we here till we die? To me, it was very profound. Even in a situation where death surrounded them, they refused to be restricted by the death they saw. So they asked themselves the question, why sit we here till we die? Meaning that even in a situation where they were practically dead, they refused to accept a reality they did not want. You know what I'm saying? Okay, let me rephrase this. They were in a situation where they were forced to live a life they did not want to live. They were in a situation where they were forced to become people they did not want to become. But even in the midst of this restriction, and even in the midst of forcefulness, they refused to succumb to the reality that was forced upon them. And they still held on to the reality that they wanted to see themselves living. You know what I'm saying? So this means that even in a very uncomfortable positions, their mind were not comfortable. Even in a situation where death faced them, they refused to accept the death that was around them. And they asked themselves, why sit we here till we die? Meaning that at that point, they made a decision of doing something about their situation. They made a decision of doing something about their uncomfortable situations. They refused to be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. Which is a very, very serious thing, because in life we will always be faced with uncomfortable situations. And the problem with most of us is that we become very comfortable in very uncomfortable situations. A simple example of this, especially in South Africa, is poverty. People are very comfortable with being poor. People are very comfortable with going home and eating one slice of bread, drinking water, and going to sleep. How do I know this? It happens from generation to generation to generation. So what does that mean? That means that these people are comfortable in this uncomfortable situation. You know what I'm saying? Even in a situation where they literally have no choice of living, even in a situation where you could actually say they are not living, they choose to be comfortable. And it is it's something that happens to many of us. We become comfortable with certain things that we shouldn't be comfortable with. For instance, we become comfortable with failure. We fail once, we call ourselves failures, and we become comfortable referring to ourselves as failures. We become very comfortable in situations of being failures. I mean, we try once to get a distinction. Let's put it in school terms. You try once to get a distinction, you fail, and then you forever remain a 4-year student. Why? Because you became comfortable in a very uncomfortable situation. Even though you're not comfortable with the fact that you're practically failing, you will So you come to a point where you become very comfortable in a situation that needs you to be uncomfortable. Now what does this say? As I come to a close, or actually I will speak about my last point. This says that never be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. Never let the restrictions of your situations limit you. Refuse to accept a reality that you do not want, especially if it's a reality infused on you by the principles of the world. Refuse to accept the reality of poverty if you want to be wealthy. Refuse to accept the reality of being a failure if you want to be successful. Refuse to accept the reality and refuse to live in an uncomfortable situation for your whole life. It is all up to you. If you continue reading the story about the 4 men with leprosy, they ended up being the saviors of the city. The city had armies that they could use to fight the enemy, but these 4 men with leprosy are the ones who conquered the army. Why? Because they refused to be comfortable. So it shows that the moment you refuse to be comfortable with yourself, you avail yourself to great opportunities of growth and of greatness. Because your mind is not restricted by where you are. And it's the same thing with these 4 men. The moment they got out of the place where they were, and the moment they went out of that uncomfortable situation into a situation that might have even killed them, they didn't care. All they knew was that they were not going to die being the same people. And God turned their courage and their sort of drive to greatness into something even greater. To me, these 4 men conquered an army of more than 1,000 people. And because of their sacrifices, the city was richer, it had food. If you read the state of the city before, the city was so impoverished that mothers began to eat their children. Literally, many in Humo will just talk, okay, today we're going to eat your child, and then tomorrow, it's your turn. We'll boil him, we'll fry mine, we'll boil yours. Then we'll take your husband tomorrow, the next day. So you'll see that they had come to a point where the people in the city, even though they had greater ability than the 4 men with leprosy, so the people in the city were comfortable. Even though they had the ability to conquer their army, they had more ability than the 4 men of leprosy to conquer their army, but because of their comfort, they were restricted. And they were forced to accept the reality that they didn't want. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a mother who wants to eat her own child. I mean, there'll come a point where we want to make babies just so that we can have food. I'm sure if it hadn't been for the 4 men of leprosy, people would make babies just to have food. So it constitutes that the moment we become comfortable, whether it be with our successes, whether it be with who we are, whether it be with our schoolwork, and more importantly, with the work of God, then we block out opportunities for greatness. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Last point basically says in a nutshell that whenever the church becomes comfortable, whenever the church comes to a point where it's comfortable with what it has achieved, and even if it's not with what it has achieved, but it has become comfortable with the situations that it finds itself in, or whenever the church has become comfortable in terms of the dream of God, then nothing happens. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because many of us as Christians have become very comfortable. We've become so comfortable that it doesn't even matter to us. I mean, we've become so comfortable that the only time that we will truly dedicate to God is Sunday. And that's for 2 hours. After that, Sunday is over, it's back to our books, it's back to the life that we live. So it shows that as Christians we've become comfortable. I mean, I want you to think about this. In a space, let's overstate it, in a space of 10 years, after the death of Jesus, 12 men were able to bring the gospel of God to the whole world. In a matter of 10 years, 12 people took the gospel international. 12 people. In a matter of 10 years, I mean, there came a point where in one night, 30 people got saved. Imagine. You can read it in the book of Acts. Peter preaches one message, 30 people get saved. Just like that. Why? Because even in that situation, because at the beginning of the church, or at the formation of the church refused to be comfortable. And had every right to be comfortable, because in the beginning of the church, if you can imagine the type of persecution they faced, people were literally burned to death for being Christian. You tell a person that you're a Christian, they burn you at the stake. Just like that. There came a point where Christians were under so much persecution that if you were found, you were put into an arena with hungry lions. No sword, nothing to defend yourself, so basically you were killed. It came to a point where Christians were taken and dipped into molten oil, burning oil. I mean, you can't even put your hand in boiling water. They were literally taken and dipped in oil. Some are dead like that. Some of them were stoned to death. Stephen, stoned to death. Paul was stoned, I don't know how many times. He was stoned, he died, he got up. Stoned again, he died, got up. Peter was crucified upside down. So you can see that these guys had much more incentive or much more reason to not preach the gospel than us. They faced death. Literally. If you would tell me you were a Christian and you tried preaching to me and I was part of the Romans, I had the right to kill you. I actually had the right to call the authorities. They would take you, burn you, torture you, or do whatever they wanted to do with you. So you can see that they had more incentive to remain comfortable, or they had more incentive to not preach the gospel than us. What's the most difficult thing that we face if we preach the gospel? Shame, even if we get it at all. What's the worst that could happen if we preach the gospel? Would stop being cool. I was never cool, so I don't care. No, but I want you to think about it. What's the worst thing that can happen if you started preaching the gospel? I'm not saying on the pulpit. I'm not saying go and try to teach the jakes. No. I'm saying in your own respect and in your own environment, even if you took it one person at a time and you changed one person's life at a time, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? I'm sure you're not going to die. Nobody's going to stone you. Nobody's going to dip you into molten oil. Nobody's going to crucify you upside down. Nobody's going to feed you to a lion. The most that could happen is that somebody will mock you. Somebody whose opinion in your life should not even matter. So you get to realize that when we become comfortable as Christians and we become comfortable as the church, we take away the opportunities for change in other people's lives. Whenever we become comfortable as a church, we take away opportunities for Tabang, Dinel, Wait a minute, now just say D. I'm sorry, no, but D sounds wrong. You couldn't still. I mean, I want you to think about it. Imagine if the person who had preached the gospel to you until you got saved didn't do what he did. Now I want you to imagine if the person who had who was supposed to preach the gospel to you became too comfortable and no longer bothered to do so. What would happen to us? Imagine if the person who was supposed to change your life got too comfortable and said that I'm not going that way. I'd rather just keep it shut and stay in my lane and not be around. So in the same manner as we are dependent, or we were dependent on God to send someone to change our lives, so as other people depended on us to go and change their lives. You get what I'm saying? So today I just want to release to you the Great Commission, which is the one mandate that God gave to all of his disciples before he left. He said, "Go ye into the world and make disciples." We're supposed to go into the world and make disciples. And it might sound harsh, but to me, the moment you don't do that, then as a church and as a Christian, you are of no use or purpose to God at all. I'm sure God every day asks himself, why does he even bother keeping you alive? Because it seems like you are adamant on not doing what you're supposed to do. I mean, if a piece of a puzzle is of no use, or if there's something that is of no use in our lives, what do we usually do? Throw it away. So shouldn't it be that in the same way, if we are no use to God, should he not throw us away? Should he just stop us from breathing? He'll be very justified to do so in my eyes. Because the principle that we live on, if anything doesn't work for you, if anything doesn't add any value in your life, or if anything doesn't push you forward, then we usually just throw it away and let it go. And to me, if I was God, I would just kill all of y'all. If you are of no use to me. But because he loves you, I don't know why. But he does. I don't know why. I wouldn't, but it's fine. Just get me like that you have him. But all I'm saying, guys, is don't be comfortable when it comes to working your own dream and the dream of God. Never be comfortable when it comes to pushing the dream of God forward and pushing your own dream forward. Because you limit not only your own greatness, but the greatness of other people. You limit not only your dream, but the dream of God. And hopefully this is the last time I want to speak this, because I feel like I'm repeating myself a billion times and I don't want to be that guy that you come to connect and you're like, we know what we're going to talk about. It's that dream of God again. But the reason why I'm talking about it so much is because I think that is something that's in God's heart. And no matter how much he tries to communicate to us, it seems as if we don't get the picture. We don't get the picture that if we don't do what we're supposed to do, people die. We don't get the picture that if we don't do what we're supposed to do, then he will never be happy. We don't get the picture that if ever we want to make God happy, praying, fasting, and all these things don't matter. It's getting people saved at the end of the day that matters. We can pray, fast, go to church every day. I mean, you can, I don't know what you can do. You can walk naked and I don't know what you can do. But as long as you do not lead people into salvation, then you have not benefited God with anything, according to me. And I want to charge you for the last time. And I pray, guys, I honestly pray that you take this seriously. Push the dream of God. As much as you want to push your own dream now, always keep in mind that whatever you build now, by the time Jesus comes, will probably be destroyed. It will not last forever. Because when Jesus comes back, it will be ashes. Then if you build the dream of God, even in eternity you will be. Even in a state of heaven, you will be respected. You know, I honestly think that there are some people that are just going to get to heaven and God is just going to kick them in, you know, just like in the end, just, you know, just go in, just go in. But there are still those people that God is going to see and He's going to rush to go shake their hands because, according to Him, they had done something great for Him. Because according to Him and in His perspective, they had a more valuable life than some of us. Because they sacrificed themselves, because they sacrificed who they were and the life that they could live to make sure that God's dream is a reality. I don't want to be one of those guys that are kicked into heaven like dogs and you just go in because you were saved and you just knew Jesus. But I want to go in as a victor. I want to go in as one of the people that God looks at and He said that, you know what, you pushed my vision and you were actually a man of distinction. Just saying. Well, that concludes our talk for today. I know it wasn't deep today. I wasn't planning to be deep. I just want you to really think about this in your life and in everything. As much as I might say many things up here, as long as you refuse to apply it in your life, then you maybe shouldn't even come here because you're wasting your time. Could be watching series, could be doing EKN. But if you take this, apply it in your life, and allow God to use you through it, then you'll be surprised at what you'll achieve. So that concludes the message for today, and hope to see you next week in a group. And yeah, that's when
We're raising a generation empowered.